My name is Anna Palmer. I'm CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning in person and on the live stream as we kick off our three-part series called 5G's Climate Impact. A big thank you to CTIA for your partnership in making this series possible. This morning we're going to be joined by Michigan Democrat Debbie Dingell, who's also co-chair of the 5G Caucus. Afterwards, CTIA's Nick Ludlum, SVP and Chief Communications Officer, Chris Balsick, VP and GM of Mobile B2B Division at Samsung, they are going to join me for a fireside chat. As always, you can find us on Punchbowl News on all social media channels, and I am at @APalmerDC. And with that, I'm going to welcome Mrs. Dingell to the stage. Congresswoman Dingell. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, as always, we're going to dive into a few news of the day questions, and then we're going to get to the topic at hand on 5G. But we have to talk about the issue of the day, which is really gun violence, what's happening across this country, and how Congress is trying to deal with it. There seems to be renewed momentum here in a way that we haven't seen in a while. The House is going to go forward and pass a pretty partisan bill, but in the Senate, you have that negotiation happening right now. How optimistic are you that something is actually going to get passed?
Well, we know that something will pass in the House. I suspect what will pass in the House will not pass in the Senate. So the focus needs to be on what Republicans and Democrats are talking about. I actually believe Senator Cornyn is negotiating in good faith. I've had discussions with him over the years on guns. I was with him on Saturday night, and he was greatly shaken by what did happen in his state. But I think, Anna, I've sort of, whenever I start talking about guns, I sing in my head, I've looked at life from all sides now. And every time something happens, everybody goes back to their corners, like boxers do. And nothing happens. And I think Democrats need to understand that they've got to not just go to their corners and scream at each other and point fingers, because you know what? Nothing's going to get done if they do that. And I think I've known Joe Biden a long time. I was there. Unlike most people, I was there when the gun bill got passed in 1994. And I know how it happened. Joe Biden knows how it happened. And it didn't happen with people pointing fingers. It was a long, loud, blunt discussion between, John Dingell was a board member of the NRA when that bill got negotiated. Jack Brooks was, they were talked about as John Dingell and Jack Brooks were known as two of the three meanest men in the Congress, and they loved their guns and they hunted together. And Jack Brooks people forget this, was chair of the House Judiciary Committee then. John must have talked to Bill Clinton, didn't yell, talked to Bill Clinton 15 times that night. I shared with Anna, I heard Chuck Schumer and John were talking about magazines, and I was like, why are they talking about magazines, to show you my naivety of that long ago? It was hard. John Dingell actually cried at one point with Bill Clinton about a promise he made to his father. But they got a gun bill done. We need to put that kind of work, that kind of effort, that kind of understanding, that kind of listening into this effort. And if we do that, we don't yell at each other. Mm-hmm. We don't accuse people. Maybe listening to the kids, they can get it done.
When you talk about that, it sounds like you're willing to, and I think oftentimes are willing to negotiate, right? You want to talk to both sides. You want to kind of hash it out. Do you have a red line? Does it have to have an assault rifle ban? Does it have to have certain things for you?
We're not going to let's be really blunt. We don't have the votes for an assault weapon ban. It's not going to happen. So but I have talked to many Republicans who agree that we should be able to raise the age from 18 to 21. Mm-hmm. Most of the school shootings we have seen have been done by 18-year-olds. And, we should be able to get that. And I would like to see that. I don't know that that's going to be possible. But, I would have said in 6 o'clock on that Saturday night, John Dingell would never have agreed to an assault weapon ban. I would have put money on it. So if people don't scream at each other, if people don't accuse each other, and I'll tell you something, I'm done with prayers. I'm done with, we need action. And I think you've seen Chris Murphy be perfect cannot be the enemy of the good. We need to make progress because I've been honest. I didn't talk about this for decades because I was embarrassed. I was shamed. I didn't know. People tried to blackmail me over it. I was a child that lived in a home with a man that shouldn't have had a gun. I know what it's like to be that child hiding in the closet, sure that you're going to die. I don't want any child to go through that, which is why we got to come together. And I really believe there are a lot of gun owners that don't want that child to do it. We have to also have some real discussions about the root causes of violence in this country, the mental health issues. My father clearly had a mental health issue, which, by the way, we wouldn't talk about.
Right.
I was afraid when I married John, and I didn't tell him my father's story. You didn't talk about it. You were ashamed that his having a mental health issue could have been an embarrassment or a problem to him in election 30 years ago.
Yeah.
We need to be open and honest about a lot of things.
I want to shift topics in a way that you can't really shift in a graceful way when you're talking from gun violence to another political issue, but I do want to talk about the renewed effort between Senator Joe Manchin and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on this reconciliation package, much smaller than the kind of original framework. How important do you think it is for Democrats going into this midterm election that they get something done, that you have something to campaign on when it comes to those issues?
So, I got to tell you, I don't think it's important to get something done for my election. I think it's important for me to get something done for the people that I represent. We stood at the White House nearly a year ago in August after a lot of hard work about the environmentalists to the table and the unions to the table to talk about EVs. We set a goal of 50% sales of electric vehicles, zero emissions by the year 2030. We're not going to get there if we don't get what we need to do to support it, to create that environment. There was, as we moved to electric vehicles, OEMs are all, vehicle manufacturers are all in. Everybody knows that that's the way. Manufacturing is, the transportation contributes more than 20% of the CO2 in this country, and it's where we need to go. But those vehicles need to be affordable. I was about to say something, but I don't want to get in trouble today about taking
Come
a
on,
shot
wake everybody up here.
We need to, vehicles need to be affordable. There's a tax credit right now. Well, the cost of those vehicles, once they go into mass production, will obviously come down. But they need the tax credit right now. That was in the bill. We need to invest in R&D. This country needs to, we're going to get into it as we discuss 5G, but we've always been the country that's been at the forefront of innovation and technology, be it telecommunications or in the auto industry. My state put the world on wheels. That means America put the world on wheels. I am not going to secede leadership on mobility to any other country in the world, but that means we've got to invest in the R&D on that battery to have distance, and we need to mine those minerals here in the U.S. That's the next table. Putting together, sitting down with the environmentalists and the unions about how are we going to mine those minerals here and not be dependent on China. And we have to build out the infrastructure and upgrade the power grid, which 5G, by the way, will help. That's all in whatever we call the next version.
Right.
Joe Manchin knows that. And he also cares about some of the other things that are in that bill. So I think, I wish we could get away from finger pointing and what do we need and what are we doing that's right for the people that we represent.
Let's shift to that because this is a good transition here. We are here to talk about 5G and climate, the impact. You are co-chair of the 5G Caucus. For anybody in the audience here who doesn't kind of know what that is, what does that entail in terms of the efforts that you're doing around 5G? So
you're going to hear from people that know 5G a lot better than I do shortly. that I study it. If you're a policymaker, you got a responsibility to dig in and try to understand. So the 5G caucus, I'm assuming if you're here because it's early morning and Congress wasn't in yesterday and you'd rather be anywhere but here probably, but 5G is the 5th generation of telecom. So we're policymakers. So we need to make sure that as the 5G caucus, we care about what it means, what kind of policies need to be passed to support it, what are the positives of it, what are the negatives, how's it impacting our communities, and what is the impact on our competitiveness, on manufacturing, and quite frankly, it's got a real benefit on emissions and reducing emissions and global climate.
So let's talk about that. The bipartisan infrastructure law that passed in late 2021 included roughly $65 billion in funding allocated toward expanding broadband access, 5G connectivity nationwide. Is that enough money? Is that the game changer that was needed when you look at kind of where you want to go when it comes to emissions, when it comes to this kind of technology?
So it's a beginning. So first of all, if there's something that the pandemic taught us, it's the inconsistency of broadband access across the country. All of a sudden, our kids were at home, they couldn't go to school, they were learning via Zoom, and too many didn't have access to broadband. And unfortunately, it's probably those who needed it the most that didn't have access to broadband, although I will also say to people I represent, my district has the University of Michigan in it, which is in Washtenaw County, which has got one of the lousiest broadband accesses in the country. Everybody needs to be in a level playing field. We all need it. We need it for our businesses, we need it for our manufacturing, but our children really should have it as they are trying to learn. So what we're trying to do and we now need to, look, I'm a car girl, so obviously our roads and bridges and transportation is a very important of infrastructure. But you forget infrastructure makes all else possible. Well, broadband's become critical to being able to do our jobs. And quite frankly, a lot of people, and I think this is a problem, I think people need to get back to the office. Someday we've got a young generation of people that have never gone to an office, and that interconnection with people needs to happen again. But broadband puts people on a level playing field. People need to have access to that technology in their home to do very many things, and we need to make sure that that's happening.
So you're talking about emissions.
It's a very important part of infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. You were talking earlier about emissions, the gas, kind of the climate impact. There's a lot of talk about the role the U.S. is playing and needs to play to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. National targets of reducing emissions by more than 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Some companies are even more aggressive than that in terms of what they're trying to do in terms of their emissions. How are you seeing 5G impact climate concerns? It seems like there's a lot of kind of possibility about what the future technology might look like when you think about electric vehicles and other things.
So there's a 2022 study, and the only reason I brought my iPad up here, because I can never remember this one number, but people do believe that enabling 5G networks will enable the abatement of 330.8 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents. That's the only number I can't remember in my head for some reason. So, but by applying this, I'll take the auto industry. I'm a car girl, told you that. We are, both General Motors and Ford are using 5G in their newer plants. The Zero factory that GM's got in Hamtramck, which is going to make their vehicles, and the F-150 truck, which is made at the Rouge plant, which is in my district, are both using 5G. And the use of this new technology increases the efficiency of production. It reduces the emissions at that plant. As technology develops, it helps you do your business more efficiently and smartly.
Mm-hmm. So emerging out of technologies, public safety issues.
Public safety. Oh, well, I was just thinking actually that way in terms of the plants. When we talk about autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles, 5G is going to be absolutely critical. I'm hoping that I will be introducing a bill in this has been one of the hardest bills I've ever done, bringing everybody together on autonomous vehicles. You know, not everybody does know, but if you're paying attention, traffic fatalities are up. It's a real crisis. And 5G has the ability to really end autonomous vehicles. People are afraid of autonomous vehicles. They're afraid of what it means not to have a driver in the vehicle. But the fact of the matter is 5G and the other technology that we're going to put into autonomous vehicles really will reduce automobile. It will improve automotive safety and reduce the amount of deaths and other accidents we're seeing on the road.
You've talked a lot about wanting to kind of bridge the gap between Republicans and Democrats not being in your corners. Is this one of those areas where you do feel like you're able to kind of work with Republicans on these issues?
I mean, I have great co-chairs, and Dusty Johnson is, I mean, we sit there and learn together, and I think everybody's trying to learn. I was talking to the guys before we came out here. One of the things that I think we all just need to, the biggest issue out here we all heard about the airplanes and airports in January, and I think people have talked about it. You need to address people's concerns when they have safety concerns. Am I safe? And get the information out there. But a lot of my mayors and local levels of government are feeling threatened by the towers that are being built. And is it a health concern? It's disrupting. We need to do a better job of talking about what's been done so that you can assure people it's not a health, it's not threatening, going to cause cancer, et cetera. And it's not disrupting. You know, people sometimes don't like the look of it, et cetera. We need to tell the benefits of it, why it matters, how it's going to help the community more, how is it going to give their children more access to broadband, how it's going to help them in their businesses. I mean, it's going to be 100 times faster than what they have right now. So we got to do a better job of talking about why this next generation is so much better than the last generation, and that it's not a threat to them.
When you look forward, right, you have this bill that you're about to introduce, but in 2-3 years forward, where do you see this debate? I mean, is it going to be even more, putting more money towards this effort, or is it going to be just deployment? What should we be all focused on?
Well, I want to when we passed the infrastructure bill, we were supposed to be technology neutral. And I have every intent of holding the FCC accountable that this is going to be technology neutral. I would dare to say I don't think they are being in the way that they said it was. So I think that will be one. I think that as we go down the road, we will always try to look at telecommunications technology. What are the issues in the communities? What do we need to be responding to? And by the way, this is 5th generation. 6th generation isn't going to be far behind.
Right.
But what I think, for me, I think we can deal with the technology issues. We'll deal with the policy issues. We'll have thoughtful conversations. The question is, how do we make sure that every American has access to broadband, high-speed broadband, that we have a level playing field, that we don't have young people or small businesses being disadvantaged because they can't afford it or their community doesn't have access to it. So I think for this country, for the future of this country, for the future of our children, we need to be investing to make sure that every community in America has access to high-speed broadband because of the advantages that it brings in so many areas.
Before I let you go, I want to ask you 2 political questions because we can't have you up on stage. It's primary day and not talk a little bit about politics. In a lot of key states, California has its primary today, one of the states with a jungle primary. Do you think that's healthy for democracy?
I don't want to see it in Michigan. I think that a lot of people don't understand what a jungle primary is, and we could end up, there are a couple of races, you could have 2 Dems, 2 Republicans running against each other, and then when it comes to the general election, it can create havoc. But it does force those candidates to do a good job of talking about who they are and what they are. And I would tell everybody that voters need to be engaged. This is, every year we say there's most important election of your lifetime. This election year is a very terrifying year, and we cannot take our democracy for granted. It is under attack. People are undermining, and there's even ways in the way that these jungle primaries happen, people are undermining the credibility of election outcomes. And if people don't believe that their vote was counted and that it's a legitimate outcome, they're not going to have confidence in their government. And that is the destruction of democracy.
I do want to ask you about one race, member-on-member race, which is happening, primary, in a few months. Haley Stevens versus Andy Levin, not far from your own home base. Who should Michiganders elect?
Well, if you think I'm touching that with the 10-foot pole, I am neutral in that race. It reminds me very much of a race of 20 years ago, of a John Dingell versus Lynn Rivers race, which was, at that time, labor versus progressives and women. I think that it is not a woman versus labor race, though I'm seeing that in some other races, but not in this one. Andy does have some labor support, but Haley has some labor support as well. I think women will play a significant, will they vote? Mm-hmm. I think Andy thinks that the progressives will turn out and vote for him. I think it's going to be a very close, competitive race.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Dingell. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
I bumped.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, now I'd like to welcome Nick Ludlum and Chris Balsick to the stage. All right, welcome, guys. Thanks so much for joining me. We got Nick, Chris. Let's get into it. We had a lot that we just covered there, and so I want to start with you, Nick. CTIA represents the U.S. wireless communications industry. Can you talk? We heard from the Congresswoman's perspective about kind of the goals of the bipartisan infrastructure package, the money, the deployment. But what are you hearing from member companies about 5G and, in particular, the impact that it could potentially have on climate?
Yeah, well, let's start with where we are. 5G, we are at the beginning, the first 1-2 years of what we call the 5G decade. We're seeing impacts now, but we're going to continue to see even greater impacts over the next 6-7 years. And we're starting to see things like faster speeds. Consumers are starting to get access to things like 5G home broadband, which is the fastest growing home broadband solution. It's bringing competition to cable, and that's really exciting. But one of the bigger impacts is going to be industrial. It's going to be industry by industry, and it's going to affect our economy. It's going to create jobs, and we're here to talk about the impact on climate. Accenture put out a report earlier this year, which said that a broad adoption of 5G will help the U.S. meet our climate reduction goals, 20% of our climate reduction goals by 2025, which is great. And then it went into different industries, the impacts on different industries, including manufacturing. Manufacturing is the third highest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S., and broad 5G adoption in that sector could help reduce the equivalent of something like 17 coal-powered gas plants or 156 million barrels of oil or something like that, which is really exciting. And so we're starting to see manufacturers, Corning, Ford, GM, which Representative Dingell brought up, and many others start to adopt those technologies, which is really exciting.
Yeah, let's just unpack that just 1 minute there, because I was reading that same study, and so again, 20% 5G could reduce carbon emissions. That's a big number, first of all. But I don't think a lot of people maybe think 5G and then think manufacturing or think some of these other industries that are obviously put out a lot of emissions into the world. Connect the dots for us a little bit there. So is it what's in your the technology behind the manufacturing, or is it what goes into what they're producing, or is it all of it?
Sure. Well, we're used to thinking of a wireless device as this, right? This is a wireless device. But what 5G allows is, makes everything a wireless device. And so if you're in a factory setting, that could be connected assembly lines or connected energy systems. It could be automation systems, robots. It could be even devices that workers are wearing or using every day, tools and so on. And all of that collects data, which then can be analyzed and used and optimized. It allows automation technologies. It allows things like predictive maintenance, which are really interesting. So you can see if there's, a flaw starting to emerge somewhere, and you don't have to wait for something to break to fix it. And so that kind of optimization and efficiency magnified over factories around the country can really have a huge impact.
Chris, I want to go to you. You are at Samsung, so you're kind of on the, not the association side, but really the kind of company that's seeing the implementation of 5G or the possibility, maybe even more. So can you talk about it from the manufacturing perspective, what you are experiencing or where you kind of see this going?
Yeah, just to kind of give you the perspective and the context. So I lead out our mobile B2B business under Samsung Electronics America. And at Samsung, it's a really exciting time right now for our mobile experience business. At our core, we're responsible for the development, the curation, the deployment of new innovative solutions like 5G that really respond to real-world problems. And it's those everyday changes that really, we believe, create that material impact across the board. Not just in the top and bottom line for business performance, because that's important, for-profit companies, but really driving towards these larger sustainability issues that we're all kind of driving towards. Again, just to kind of give you an example from a Samsung perspective, by the end of this year, 2022, Samsung's use of recycled ocean-borne or ocean-driven materials, we're going to continue to save and retain almost 50 tons of discarded fishing nets that'll be used in the manufacturing process of these wireless endpoints that Nick just handed up. Additionally, we've got a commitment right now to reduce all plastics from our mobile device packaging materials by 2025. This year, when we launched the Galaxy S22, we used 50% less plastics, and of the plastics we used 100% recycled. And to include the paper, there was all 100% recycled products in there. When we start looking at the utility in manufacturing relative to 5G, really it's the mid-band that we're talking about, where we're using it to enable an expansion of connectivity in our facilities through fixed wireless access. We've got in Korea our Samsung Network Smart facilities that were built from the ground up with 5G in mind. So we've equipped it fully with commercial 5G, really to improve our overall manufacturing process. Flexibility is key, as well as increasing productivity. And when you think about what 5G can do, it really becomes speed to data, decision-making, information access, product tracking. With regard to decision-making, we're using 5G, using video analytics and machine learning to actually track product monitoring. This is really helping our workforce managers, our production line leaders, make real-time decisions on how to load or unload a particular production line to ensure that we don't have any delays or defects. Information access. Years ago, we had, you had the goggles, the AR. We're using 5G-powered augmented reality right now for our on-site workers to truly make real-time decisions relative to how they're actually running their cadence with their production lines. Integrated into that is access to globally remote experts that actually respond to much more complex problems on their day-to-day basis. And then certainly we're leveraging as a manufacturing company at heart, we're using 5G for automated vehicles to guide products through the manufacturing process, as well as product tagging, geolocation, asset management, piece part components, final product delivery, all in aggregate. And really 5G is coming to play relative to how fast can we get access to data to make those real-time decisions relative to how we actually maintain and minimize any defects or delays in our overall manufacturing process.
So Samsung also has a 5G innovation zone in Austin, Texas. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening there?
So my perspective is mobile, so that's our semiconductor play. But again, this is where we're taking 5G to the next level. And actually, as I was sharing with the representative earlier, we're actually starting in our labs with 6G already. So we're already starting to see the impacts of 6G on the horizon. Again, we're still got, as we talked about, 5 to 6 years before we see the commercialization of 6G. But when you start thinking about 5G relative to robotics, when you start thinking about persistent connectivity, it becomes really interesting because when we're talking to large auto manufacturers or aircraft manufacturers, 5G is a challenge right now. And we're using these innovation labs to actually demonstrate the utility and the value of what 5G can bring. If you think back, a lot of these manufacturing companies have built laboratories or production lines that date back 15, 20 years ago. So the infrastructure isn't ready set to take on a 5G ubiquitous environment. You've got structural challenges. You've got hardware challenges across that just drive significant monetary issues to ensure that we get 5G adapted. Persistent connectivity drives predictive analytics, real-time analysis, mobile endpoint and edge computing, which is going to be critical when you want a ubiquitous application for robotics or a fully automated robotic platform. That's where 5G comes into play. But we've got to overcome some of these infrastructure challenges across the board.
Nick, I'm going to just turn to you and to close it out a little bit here. So we heard where Congressman Dingell thinks kind of the next 5-10 years. Project forward a little bit. Right now, kind of you're getting the message out about 5G, implementation, making sure that people are adapting it across the country. Where does this go? Where do you see it goes in terms of the climate conversation and just generally?
Well, one of the useful things to do, in my world, has become a little bit of a cliche, but maybe here less so, is to look forward. Maybe it's worth looking back, right? Where were we 10 years ago? I was speaking with Congresswoman Dingell about that earlier, and the fact that 10 years ago we wouldn't have taken Ubers to get here, right? I wouldn't have used my phone to unlock my office door this morning and get in, or to check my bank account or so on. And so the way in which wireless has 4G wireless has changed the way we live and work is so fundamental that we all take it for granted. And so you asked me to look forward in 5-6 years. 5G is already covering more than 90% of Americans now. More and more will subscribe every year, and it'll get more prevalent and ubiquitous. But 5 or 6 years from now, we're going to be seeing it permeate everything that we do. It will be certainly powering our phones and powering those devices, but it'll be powering our cars. It'll be powering our factories. It'll be powering the stage, right? or built into the building itself to make sure that we're monitoring the health of our physical infrastructure. So the possibilities for what 5G can do, beyond manufacturing, beyond climate, are really limitless, and we're going to be really pushing the boundaries of that over the next 5 or 6 years.
And is there anything in terms of Congress, things that we should be watching? Obviously the support of Congresswoman Dingell with the 5G Caucus and what they're kind of working on.
Yeah, in broad terms, a lot of this comes back to things like spectrum. Earlier this year, some of the wireless carriers turned on C-band spectrum, and we saw almost immediately 50% increases in speed, right? And that's because spectrum really is the lifeblood of the wireless industry. So freeing up more spectrum for licensed commercial use is really critical. Making sure that the FCC has auction authority to do that, something that's being discussed right now, is really important. And then making sure that wireless carriers can make the best and fullest use of that they're not encumbered in some way. That's really, really important. And the good news is there's lots of bipartisan support for that, and we expect that to continue.
All right, we'll leave on a positive note. I appreciate it. Nick, Chris, thank you so much for your time this morning. Thank all of you for joining us here in person and on the live stream, and of course, Congresswoman Dingell and CTIA for making this conversation possible. You can tune in and check out our Punchbowl News Events Hub for our next CTIA conversation that's going to be coming up in the next couple of months. And with that, thanks so much and have a great day.